Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
It's great to be back.
So today we're looking at this court case in Saskatchewan, and it
Yeah.
really has people talking about
Yeah.
the Canadian justice system, and
Well,
specifically how it works
yeah.
when Indigenous offenders are involved.
Absolutely.
We've got some really interesting stuff to go through today.
Yeah.
Some excerpts from our Reddit discussion. It's on Our Canada.
Oh, okay.
And we also have this National Post article.
Okay, great.
And, we're going to try and make sense of it all.
Yeah, it's
A lot.
it's a really fascinating case. It brings
Yeah.
up a lot of big questions.
Especially this thing called Gladue principles,
Yeah.
which seem to be like right at the heart of
Yeah.
all the controversy.
Absolutely. And it
Ah.
really forces us to kind of,
Yeah.
grapple with these tough questions about
Mm.
like how do we balance accountability with historical injustices?
Oh, for sure.
And what does justice even really mean
Yeah.
in a system that's been, you know, shaped by colonialism?
Okay, so let's get into it. So we're talking about Colin Umferville.
Okay.
He was convicted back in 2019,
Hmm.
possession of an illegal handgun,
Okay.
ammunition,
Right.
and methamphetamine.
Oh, wow.
So initially, he was sentenced to 5 years,
Okay.
but that sentence was cut in half. And the reason why is because of those Gladue principles.
Right, and to really understand why this is causing such a stir,
Yeah.
we have to take a step back and look at this,
Hmm.
bigger picture of how Indigenous people experience the Canadian justice system.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about like a long history
Right.
of discrimination, overrepresentation in prisons,
Right.
and the Gladue principles, which came about from this
Mm.
landmark Supreme Court decision in 1999,
Yeah.
are a way to try and address that imbalance.
Okay, so it's like instead of just looking at the crime,
Exactly.
it's judges are supposed to consider like all the circumstances of Indigenous offenders. So things like residential schools,
Yeah.
displacement from their traditional lands,
Right.
systemic racism, all of that.
Exactly. It's acknowledging that there's,
Yeah.
this long history, this drama
Yeah.
that might have contributed to an individual ending up,
Right.
in trouble with the law.
Involved with the law. Right.
Yeah.
It's like acknowledging that the justice system like hasn't always been fair
Absolutely.
or equitable for
Mhm.
Indigenous people.
Right.
But it seems like applying these principles in practice
Yeah,
causes like a ton of debate.
for sure.
I mean, even just on Reddit,
Mhm.
people are like struggling to reconcile the need for punishment,
Yeah.
but also this need to, acknowledge historical wrongs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Umferville's case
Right.
is just like the perfect example of how
Yeah.
complex this is.
So, okay, let's actually get into the specifics of his case.
Okay.
So we know he was found with like the handgun, the ammunition, and the meth.
Mm-hmm.
But like, what else do we know about his background?
Well, court documents really paint this pretty, sad
Hmm.
picture of Umferville's life.
Okay.
So he identifies as Métis
Mm-hmm.
through his maternal great-grandfather.
Okay.
But his father was a First Nations residential school survivor,
Wow.
and he actually died when Umferville was only 9.
Oh my goodness, that's just
It's really heartbreaking.
awful.
And it gets worse. As a child, he witnessed his sisters being sexually abused.
Oh gosh.
He's placed in foster care,
Yeah.
diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and ADHD,
Wow.
which, obviously made it
Yeah.
even harder to cope with everything.
Absolutely.
He ended up dropping out of school in 6th grade.
So his lawyer argued that the judge didn't really fully consider
Mm-hmm.
all of that, right? Like the impact of all these experiences. Yeah.
Exactly. Especially in light of, the residential schools and
Yeah.
the intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
And the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal agreed with that.
Interesting.
And they said that judges are obliged to attempt to redress
Wow.
these tragic realities.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
It's like they're saying that the justice system,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just there to punish,
Right.
it has this responsibility to like understand why
Yeah.
someone ends up in this position,
Exactly. Especially in the context of,
Yeah.
Indigenous people in Canada and
Yeah.
their history.
Right. But how does that play out
Right.
in a case like this? I mean, he's still committed. Like,
Yeah.
these were serious crimes.
That's where things get
Right.
difficult. Right. Because you have some people,
Yeah.
and we saw this on Reddit, who believe that,
Yeah.
taking Umferville's background into account, it lessens what he did.
Right.
And they could set like a dangerous precedent. They say everyone should be held to the same standard.
And then others like completely see it and as like a step towards achieving justice, real justice.
Yeah, and they point out that, locking someone up without like addressing the underlying issues often just leads to them reoffending.
Right. Yeah. So it's this tension between like wanting to hold people accountable for their actions, but also recognizing that those systemic factors might have contributed to,
to how they ended up where they are.
To their behavior.
Right. Exactly. And this case, with all its specific details, right, and Umferville's own statements about like what he plans to do,
which we'll get into.
It really brings all those tensions to the surface.
So we've got this whole thing, right? Historical injustices, a justice system trying to fix it.
Yeah.
Using these Gladue principles. But how do they even work? Like, are there like guidelines? Is it just like up to the judge?
It's a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah, we really need to
go down there.
Explore it.
Yeah.
All right, but before we do that, I want to talk about the public reaction.
Okay.
Because, wow, people have a lot to say. Okay. We pulled some stuff from a Reddit discussion on Ascaridata.
Okay.
And it's just all over the place.
Well, that's really interesting.
It's understandable, right?
Yeah, it's such an emotional, complex issue.
Right. Like some people are really sympathetic to Umferville. They point to like his tough upbringing, the systemic factors that led him to this point.
Right.
They see the reduced sentence as like a step towards acknowledging, the wrongs of the past. But then you also see people who just like completely disagree with the sentence reduction. They say that it like minimizes how serious his crimes were, especially, because he was found with a gun and drugs. They're worried about public safety, worried about him reoffending.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you have people questioning like his connection to Métis culture, right? He himself said that he doesn't feel connected to the community, the traditions. So it really makes you think, like, how do you even measure someone's indigeneity?
Right.
And should that even be a factor?
That's a really good question.
In the justice system.
It's a valid point.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets to the heart of what Gladue's all about.
Yeah.
It's not just checking boxes or claiming an identity. It's understanding the impact of colonization and how it continues to affect Indigenous people's lives.
Right. And then some people are even saying that, like, Gladue principles create a double standard. Like, it's giving Indigenous offenders this get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yeah, they call for
They're saying, like, everyone should be subject to the same legal standards.
Yeah, and that's a perspective that we need to acknowledge. Yeah. Even if it, makes us uncomfortable, it might be coming from a place of, like, not really understanding what Gladue's all about.
Exactly. It's not about letting people off easy.
It's not a free pass.
Right.
It's about making sure that sentencing is fair.
Yeah.
And that it considers all those...
It's a whole picture.
Whole picture, yeah.
So we've got, like, all this range of opinions, right? Some supportive, some critical. Yeah. Some even, like, questioning the whole point of Gladue.
Right.
It seems like there's a lot of misunderstanding out there.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to go beyond just the headlines and really dig into what these principles...
What they actually are.
Yeah, what they are, how they actually work.
Okay, let's switch gears to this National Post article.
Okay.
Which takes, like, a different angle to this case.
Right.
So on Reddit, it was all about, like, public opinion, the bigger implications. But the National Post, they, like, focus in on some specific details that just add, like, another layer to this whole thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They really highlight what Umferville himself said about what he plans to do after he's released.
Oh, wait.
He said that he's going to sell drugs.
Oh, wow.
To support himself while he's waiting to get into school.
Okay.
Which is, like, a pretty stark thing to admit.
Yeah, it's a stark admission, and it kind of seems to contradict this whole idea of rehabilitation, right?
Really?
And then they also focus on this risk assessment that was done.
Okay.
And it said that he was in the 98th percentile for reoffending, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, that raises some serious, like, red flags, right? About, like, public safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you have this man, right, who clearly has experienced a lot
of hardship.
Yeah.
And his life has been shaped by forces he can't control, right?
Sure.
But then you also have this, like,
Yeah.
him saying these things and this assessment that he might be a danger.
Exactly. That's like the dilemma of this case, right?
Yeah.
How do we balance, compassion, understanding, but also protect the public?
So, okay, we've got this super complicated case.
Mm-hmm.
This guy struggling with a difficult past.
Yeah.
The justice system trying to make things right, and the public trying to figure out what justice even means on all of this.
It's a lot to unpack.
It's a lot.
There's no easy answers here.
So before we dive into the specifics of Gladue, like, what stands out to you so far? What questions are you thinking about? What are your reactions?
Yeah.
We're going to explore all of that as we keep going with this deep dive, so stick with us.
Yeah, stay tuned.
We'll be right back.
Okay,
so we've laid out, like, the context and all the details of Umferville's case. We've even touched on, like, what the public's saying.
Yeah.
But let's get to the core of all this. Gladue principles.
Yeah. You hear that term a lot.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to, like, really break down what it actually means.
I feel like I'm even a little fuzzy on it. Like, is it a law? Guidelines? A magic spell?
Not magic, unfortunately. Though I'm sure some people would like it to be.
Yeah.
It's basically like a legal directive that came out of that R.V. Gladue case in 1999.
The Supreme Court one.
Yep.
Right.
That decision was all about the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the justice system.
Right, right.
The court basically said, hey, all these historical and systemic factors play a role.
Yeah.
Like colonialism, residential schools, discrimination.
Right.
All of that.
It's a lot.
Contributes to the fact that there's just too many Indigenous people in prison.
So Gladue's saying, like, hey, judges.
Exactly.
So you got to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, you can't just look at the crime itself.
Yeah.
You got to think about the context.
Right. So it's acknowledging that, like, things aren't equal.
Exactly. The playing field's not level.
And just having this, like, one-size-fits-all approach.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Okay, so what does that look like?
So judges have to consider a ton of factors.
Okay.
Things like, intergenerational trauma from residential schools.
Okay.
Loss of language, culture.
Yeah.
Poverty. Substance abuse. Racism. Discrimination.
It's like the judges have to become historians and sociologists all at once.
In a way, yeah.
Wow.
It's about seeing the person.
Yeah.
Not just as a criminal, but as, someone shaped by their past or environment.
Okay, but does that mean that Indigenous offenders get lighter sentences?
It's not about automatically giving lighter sentences.
Okay.
It's about making sure the sentence makes sense.
Okay.
Considering everything.
Okay, yeah.
So that might mean instead of jail, looking at community programs, restorative justice.
Right, right.
Stuff focused on healing, not just punishment.
I mean, that makes sense. If someone's dealing with addiction or mental health issues.
Exactly.
From trauma, jail might not help.
It might make things worse for everyone.
Right. So Gladue's about breaking that cycle.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do judges even get all this information about someone's background?
Yeah. Gladue reports.
Okay.
These are reports made by, trained professionals.
Okay.
They look into the person's history, family, community ties, all of that.
So it's like this personalized social history.
That's a great way to put it.
Wow.
Gives the judge a better understanding.
Right. Okay. This is making more sense now. But are there any, like, examples that really show how this works in real life?
Absolutely. There's this case from 2016, R.V. Peel.
Okay.
Really shows how complex Gladue is.
Okay.
2 Indigenous men, long criminal records, convicted of serious stuff.
So open and shut. Right.
That's what the Crown thought.
Yeah.
Long sentences. That's it. But the Supreme Court actually overturned it.
Oh, wow.
Said Gladue matters, even with repeat offenders.
Really?
Yeah, judges can't just focus on past convictions.
So even if someone has, like, a huge record...
You still have to consider their background. Look for other options.
Okay, so IPLE was a big win for Gladue then.
It was.
But I'm guessing not everyone was happy.
Yeah, there was a lot of pushback.
Right.
People who believe in being tough on crime were not happy.
Right. So even though Gladue's been around for, like, over 20 years, it's still causing all this controversy.
It's a really complicated issue. It touches on some deep beliefs.
Yeah.
About justice, accountability, the legal system.
Right, right.
hard to make everyone happy.
We haven't really talked about the victims.
Oh, that's an important point.
Right.
Yeah, they often get overlooked.
It's not about minimizing their experience, right?
No, Gladue's not about excusing anything.
Right, it's not about letting people off.
It's about understanding.
Okay, yeah.
And finding justice for everyone.
So how do we do that?
That's the tough part.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer.
Right.
Got to be careful, compassionate.
Right. Consider everything.
Each case is different.
It seems like Gladue's less about rules and more about, like, changing how we see things.
It's a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Looking at things differently.
Right. So in Umferville's case, the judge decided, like, okay, reduced sentence, considering his past, Gladue. But like we've been saying, that decision caused a lot of debate.
Right. And that brings us back to that big question.
Yeah.
What does justice mean?
Right.
Especially with all this historical trauma and inequality.
Even though Umferville's case is just one example, it shows just how complicated Gladue is.
It's not easy to apply fairly.
No.
For everyone involved.
I'm thinking about those other approaches to justice.
Yeah.
Like restorative justice.
It's worth exploring.
Yeah.
Restorative justice is all about repairing the harm.
Okay.
Bringing everyone together.
Okay.
The victim, the offender, the community.
That's really different from how we usually do things.
It is.
Right.
But it's gaining traction.
Okay.
Especially with Indigenous offenders.
So we're moving away from just, like, locking people up.
We're starting to.
That's good.
It's a good step, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to keep asking these tough questions.
Yeah.
Keep listening. Keep pushing for a better system.
This has given me a lot to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Gladue isn't perfect, but it's important.
Absolutely. It's trying to address those historical injustices.
Yeah.
It's complicated. It's evolving.
Yeah.
We need to keep talking about it.
So as we move into the last part of this,
okay,
we're going to focus back on Umferville.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, like, him saying he's going to sell drugs.
Right.
And that high risk of reoffending.
Yeah.
How does that fit with the reduced sentence?
Yeah. How do we make sense of that?
Right.
And what does it tell us about Gladue's effectiveness?
Yeah, good question.
Big questions.
It really gets to the heart of this whole debate, doesn't it?
It does. It requires really careful thought.
Yeah, for sure.
About the individual, but also society as a whole.
Okay, so let's unpack all that.
Let's get into it.
See if we can make sense of it. This case really makes you rethink Gladue, right?
It does.
Like, it's supposed to be about historical injustices and systemic problems.
Yeah.
But then Umferville says he's going right back to crime.
It's definitely...
It's like, how does that even...
It highlights the tension.
Yeah.
Between accountability and, you know, what society's role is in all this.
Right. It makes you ask, like, if someone gets Gladue and then reoffends, does that mean Gladue failed?
That's the big question.
It's tough because you want to believe people can change. Right.
You do. You want to have faith in rehabilitation.
But then there's this whole public safety thing.
Right. You can't ignore that.
And it's not like Gladue fixes everything else.
No, it's not a magic solution.
Right. Like, there's still the need for support.
Absolutely.
Or opportunities.
Yeah.
Strong communities.
People need support systems.
So even if a judge uses Gladue and the sentence is lighter, the problems are still there.
Those underlying issues don't just vanish.
Exactly.
It's a long process, right?
Yeah.
Addressing those root causes of crime, especially in Indigenous communities.
It's not just the justice system.
No, it takes everyone working together.
Social services, healthcare, education.
Everything. It's a whole societal effort.
So Gladue's not the answer. It's like...
a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
One important piece.
We also haven't really talked about the victims.
Oh, you're right. We need to bring them into this.
Yeah, it's been all about Umferville and Gladue. But what about the people he harmed?
Their voices matter.
Absolutely.
They deserve justice. They deserve to heal.
So how do we make sure their needs are met, but also...
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
How do we balance their needs with the offender's circumstances?
Right. It's not about, like, one side versus the other.
No, it's about finding a way to address both.
And then there's that risk assessment.
Oh, right. That 98th percentile.
It makes you wonder, like, what's the point of rehabilitation if someone's that likely to reoffend?
A tough question. And risk assessments, they're not perfect.
Right. They can't predict the future.
Exactly. They're a tool, not a crystal ball.
So we can't just give up on people, right?
No, that's the danger.
Just because of some assessment.
We can't let it become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. So we use it as information, but we don't let it be the deciding factor.
Exactly. People can change, even if they have a high risk.
This is making me realize, like, our justice system, it's got a long way to go.
It's a big job.
To be truly fair.
Creating a just system.
Yeah.
It's a huge undertaking, but we have to do it.
And it's not just laws and policies.
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about how we think about justice, our relationship with Indigenous communities.
It's about changing our mindset, seeing each other as human beings.
So where do we even go from here?
Education is key.
Okay.
We have to learn about Gladue.
Yeah.
The history behind it, the nuances.
Not just being for or against it.
Right. It's not about picking sides. It's about understanding.
And everyone needs to be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Not just experts, but communities, victims, everyone.
We need to support communities, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Address those root causes of crime. Poverty, lack of opportunity.
Create a system that helps people, not just punishes them.
Exactly. Help people break free from that cycle.
And we need a justice system that's about healing.
Restoration, not just retribution.
Right.
That's what we should be aiming for.
This has been a real deep dive.
It has.
We've covered so much.
Gladue, accountability, societal responsibility.
Yeah.
We've really dug deep into the justice system.
And hopefully it's made everyone think.
Yeah, made people curious to learn more.
So we'll leave you with this. What does justice really mean?
Especially when we think about historical trauma and inequality.
How do we create a system that's fair for everyone?
Victims and offenders both.
Keep thinking about those questions.
Keep learning. Keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.